control and coordination. Now first, what do we mean by control? Sometimes if you are a monitor, your teacher must have asked you to go and control the class. Many teachers talk in terms of it's becoming so difficult to control students. Even at home, when sometimes you have been continuously watching TV or you have been on your computer, then who intervenes? Your parents. They try and restrain you. So what is control? Control is nothing. It's not a bad word. It only means to restrain. By controlling, we can stop, slow, expedite, or start a process. It's something like brakes. You have your car, you love the speed, and if the driver is driving at the speed of say 200 kilometers per hour, what will happen? Surely there will be accident. Now even if he is driving very slowly on a highway and other vehicles are moving at a very high speed, then also there is a problem. So there is an accelerator, there is a brake. In life also same things are there. You cannot go on at same speed. There has to be a control, and this is what is control in the body also. And second thing is that not just controlling, also making every activity happen in a harmonious and regulated fashion. Say, your monitor in the class, what does he do? He is kind of a connection between you all and the teacher, and he helps the teacher to do many activities. So in a way, he is helping to coordinate. The word coordinate is made up of two words. Co means joint. Ordinatus means to regulate. So this is a regulation which is not in isolation, but it is regulation of all activities happening simultaneously. Let us take the example of school. School doesn't mean only studies. There is morning assembly, there are house activities, there are inter-school competitions. So how does it happen that everything happens at right time without creating a chaos? Who is doing all this? There is a hierarchy. There is a principal, vice principal, there are teachers, house masters, class teachers. So all this helps to regulate. In our body also, there are two systems which help in controlling and coordinating. One of them is nervous system, and second is endocrine system. This is also called nervous coordination, and this is chemical coordination. Largely, we associate life with movement. Anything that is moving, we say is alive. And we have also understood that in life processes, it is the movement of the molecules. Now, why does this movement occur? In case of plants, largely the movement can be also because of growth. Let us take the case of a seed. This is a seed. We put it in the soil. The root comes up, the plumule goes up, it pushes the soil and it comes out. A movement has taken place. But this movement is because of growth. If this seed does not get water and it is not able to grow, then this movement will not take place. But in case of animals, the movement is not only because of growth. There can be many other things also. Have you seen a cat running after a mice? That's also movement. What is it for? Food. So in animals, The movement can be for protection, for food, for mating. But how does it pick the changes in the environment? What is it that helps us to pick the stimuli from the environment? What is a stimulus? Stimulus, you can say, is a change in the environment. It is a situation. Now, when you are in the playground and if your house has won, or when India wins and you are in front of TV, you shout. Even your umpire shouts, "How is it?" Do you shout like this in your classroom? You don't. You whisper. Who tells you to do this? These are some of the things that are being coordinated. How? That's the question. There is a special type of tissue, the nervous tissue, which is made up of a network of nerve cells, which are also called neuron, the unit of nervous system. The structure of a neuron is very interesting. It is made in such a way that it can pick stimuli. It has a large rounded body, which is called cell body or the cyton. Now, you must be wondering why these gaps? These are the branches that occur from the cyton. These branches are called dendrons and their further branches are called dendrites. So, these are the dendrites. You must have rightly guessed, it is the dendrites that pick up the stimuli. The cyton has a large nucleus, lot of cytoplasm. All cell organelles except one, the centriole. So, what is the result? It cannot divide. That is why if a nerve cell is damaged, it can neither be replaced nor repaired. It is just a total loss. So, my dear, nerve cells are very important. This cyton is continued as a cytoplasmic process called axon. The cell membrane of axon is called axolemma. This whole thing is covered by a sheath. Actually, this is axon and this is axolemma, and it is covered by a sheath which is called neurilemma. Some neurons have another covering in between which is called myelin sheath. But all neurons do not all have myelin sheath. After a little interval, there is an area which is without myelin sheath, and that is called Ranvier's node. And finally, it ends up in a gland or a muscle. This is the terminal end. There is nuclei even in the axon, right? Now, here there are ribosomes which have proteins called Nissl granules. So, the impulse, or you can say the stimuli, is picked up by the dendrite. Now, coming back to the terminal end, it ends up either in a muscle or a gland, or also sometimes it is close to another neuron, because neurons form a network. Now, this gap between the two neurons is called synapse. Now, what is a nerve impulse? Now, when the dendrites they pick a stimuli, then there are certain chemicals produced. So, first there is a stimulus which is picked up by dendrite, and during this process some chemicals are produced. We will write it little bigger. At the dendrites, the chemicals get converted to an electrical impulse. So, you can imagine here is the stimulus, the chemicals have come into the dendrite, changed to electrical impulse, and then it has come to cyton. From here it goes through the axon till it reaches the terminal end. Now, if it is the terminal end is in the muscle or the gland, then the impulse will come there, but if it is with the another neuron, then what will happen? At the terminal end, again the electrical impulse will change into chemical substances. These chemicals will travel through the synapse and the process will start all over again. It is like a relay race. What happens in a relay race? The runner runs and then passes on the baton. So, nerve cells also are doing the relay race for us. Our body is full of neurons and their network. So, after the electrical impulse, we will say it goes into axon. From axon to before axon it will go to cyton, then axon, then terminal end, again the chemicals, and then synapse, another neuron, and the process will be again repeated in similar fashion. Again stimulus, chemicals, going to dendrites, converting into electrical impulse, from there travelling through cyton, through axon, and finally into the terminal end, and then through the synapse to another network. So, the relay race goes on, right. Now, it is the cyton which has all the cell organelles, prominent nucleus with nucleolus. So, it is this which does all the metabolic activities for the rest of the neuron. So, neuron is the unit of nervous system, and this is what we are going to base our understanding of control and coordination on. You know, thinking process is very complex. It takes lot of impulses, lot of neurons are involved in this process, and it is a very complicated process, and so it takes more time. So, generally what happens, if inadvertently you have touched a hot object, before you can even think of the pain, you have removed your hand. You can do a small experiment on this. Take a frog, damage its brain, now the brain is not there, no more thinking can take place, and you prick the pin. What happens? The frog moves its leg, brain is not there, still it is moving the leg. Who is doing this? Another example, you want to watch TV, how many times you really get up and use the TV and change your buttons from the TV screen? These days you like to do it from the remote because that is convenient, shorter, faster. Our body has its own remotes, and in emergency situations it uses a simpler pathway, and that simpler pathway is the reflex arc, and the action is reflex action. You move into the sun, and before you know, in the bright light, your eyes get screwed. I wish I could walk up to you and try to slap you. Immediately you will duck. This is what is reflex action. So, what is a reflex action? Reflex action is an involuntary action. It is spontaneous and it is controlled by spinal cord. Right? Now, what happens is that, say this is your hand and it touched a hot object. This stimulus of heat will be picked up by the dendrites, or you can say by the special type of nerves which are called sensory nerves. These sensory nerves will carry the impulse to spinal cord. There, the spinal cord itself will take the action. It will receive the message, take a decision and pass on the instruction through another set of nerves, the motor nerves, to the muscles. So, the muscles will make the hand move, right. This is what is reflex arch. Now, brain has no role in this, but is it true that brain has no role? Brain has. That is, after the action has been taken, the message is also sent to brain, so that it can be used for future. How do you people know that touching a hot thing is a problem? Because through experience, this you have learned and this information has been stored in your brain. So, if there is a flame, probably you will not touch it, but if there has been a hot pan in which your mother boiled water, you do not know it was hot, but you touch it, but you remove the pain you feel later. What is the advantage of this reflex action? The main advantage is it is protective in nature. It is so fast that it can protect us. If the message was to go to brain, it would have taken much longer time, and as a result, probably by the time your muscles had got the instruction, you would have been burnt. So, now you understand how important these reflexes are. They are the ones which protect us. So, thinking is a very complex process. Now, for example, if you are sitting in the class, teacher is teaching, but you are feeling hungry. Now, there is this stimulus of hunger. At the same time, you also have prior information stored in your brain that if you eat during the class, teacher will punish you. So, then you will think of the ways and means by which you can eat your food slyly, so that your hunger is also satisfied and you are not also punished. Now, this will require a lot of stimuli, isn't it? Lot of stored information. Only then that information, past information and present information will be processed. You will look at it, when is ma'am turned her face, she is towards the blackboard, now is the time. So, all this will go on, and which means it requires more than one stimulus, and then it also needs processing, and then the action. All this is taken care of by one main controlling body. What is that? One main controlling organ of the body? Brain. Brain is a very important organ, very delicate also, so it has to be well protected. Just like heart, it was well protected in the rib cage. Similarly, brain and spinal cord are also well protected in a bony structure. Brain in the skull, which is also called cranium, and the spinal cord in the vertebral column. But you know, these days there is so much of traffic, so scooter or two-wheeler riders are also asked to wear helmet, because brain is so important. When the brain dies, we also die. Brain death is the first signal, first symptom, because brain is the controlling and coordinating organ. If brain is there, not there, then we cannot survive. But even this cranium is not enough. It requires more protection. It has to be protected from shocks which have to be absorbed. So, in addition to cranium, or you can say below the cranium and just above the brain or the spinal cord, there are three layers called meninges. Plus, between the two, there is cerebrospinal fluid. This cerebrospinal fluid also helps to protect the brain. It is filtered from the blood and it is rich in nutrients, oxygen, food, right? It also supplies hormones and it removes waste. So, now the brain, you understand, is very well protected by cranium, meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, we come to the structure of the brain. Brain is mainly made up of three parts: the forebrain, the midbrain and the hindbrain. After this, we will go into the details of each part of the brain and try and understand which part is doing which function. The forebrain is made up of two parts: the olfactory lobes and the cerebrum. Olfactory lobes are below the cerebrum and they are concerned with smell. The cerebrum has four parts. First part is the frontal lobe, this is in the front as the very name suggests. Then there is parietal lobe which is on the sides. Then there is temporal lobe which is in the middle, and then there is occipital lobe which is on the lower side. The frontal lobe is concerned mainly with intelligence, memory, understanding. The parietal lobe is concerned with touch, pain, pressure and taste. The temporal lobe is concerned with speech, hearing, and the occipital lobes are concerned with sight. So, cerebrum is a very important part, in fact the largest part of the brain. It is in two parts and they are called cerebral hemispheres. Each part is called a cerebral hemisphere. The two spheres are joined together. And not only this is the largest part, there are folds in this, because actually cerebrum is much larger than the space available. So, it cannot fit, but you know these folds are only in the human beings. If we study the comparative structure of the brain of various vertebrates, we find the brain of the fish is very small, and as we move on to the amphibians, reptiles, birds and then mammals, we find in the case of mammals the cerebrum is the largest, and among mammals also it is the human beings who have the largest cerebrum showing folds, and that is why it is the human being who is dominating the whole universe, because they have more cerebrum, more intelligence, and that is why they have learned to rule nature. So, after this we come to the midbrain. The midbrain is a very small area, and its main function is to connect. Midbrain connects forebrain with the hindbrain. So, you can say it is just a connection. The next important part is hindbrain. Hind, you understand, means something which is behind. The hindbrain also has two parts. One is cerebellum, जिसको छोटा मगज भी बोलते हैं. It is at the back, lower side and the back side of the brain. But it is very important. Actually in body everything is important. And the second part is medulla. The cerebellum is concerned with balancing of the body, and precision in voluntary movements. Now, what do we mean by voluntary movements? Voluntary means which is under the control of our brain, and involuntary which are not. What does that mean? They will happen in any case. Beating of the heart, movement of the digestive organs, all these are involuntary movements. And the voluntary movements are like I am writing on the board, I am walking, I am picking up something, I am bicycling, or I am swimming. All these are voluntary movements, and the precision of these voluntary movements is the area for cerebellum. The both voluntary and involuntary movements also have their place in the frontal lobe of the cerebrum. So, frontal lobe is not only a seat of intelligence, it is also a seat for voluntary and involuntary movements. But the cerebellum's importance is in the precision. If say my cerebellum becomes small or it is not fully developed, if I want to pick up a thing, my hand will not reach that thing. So, your ability to walk in a straight line, your ability to touch the fingertip and your nose without making a mistake, your ability to cycle, all these are the areas which are controlled by cerebellum. Then the medulla, this is the last part, it is like a triangle, it continues with the spinal cord, and this medulla is concerned with involuntary movements. So, even if the forebrain is damaged, one can continue to live. Why? Because of medulla. The basic activities, the basic movements of our internal organs will continue even if the forebrain is damaged. But if the hindbrain is damaged and if the basic involuntary activities of our life processes are not done, then of course we can't survive. Of course, if we are only living due to our medulla, that life will be only the life of a vegetable. You have heard that some people move into coma, their cerebrum is not working, but medulla is, so they are surviving. Medulla also controls some of the reflex actions. like batting of the eyelid, sneezing, etc., coughing. So, this is how all activities have been divided among various parts of the brain. Found it interesting? Everything in proper control and properly coordinated. Brain in fact also controls the endocrine system, because the pituitary gland, the master gland, is in the brain. Animals move in search of food, but plants don't have to search their food because they can make their own food. But does that mean that plants don't move at all? That's not true. There is movement in plants, and what we are going to study today is movement in plants. The classic example is that of the touch me not plant. You know that we touch the leaves and they fold. A very quick response. And also it is not concerned with the direction of the stimulus. What was the stimulus in this case? The touch. And what was the response? Folding of the leaves. There is another kind of movement also. You take a seed and let it germinate. A root like structure grows out of it, and that is the radicle, and the stem like portion goes up, and that is the plumule. Now there is movement, and that is why due to this movement the plant is able to come out of the soil and the roots are grow into the soil. But how does this happen? Now say if there was no favorable condition and the seed did not germinate, will the movement take place? No. So what is the conclusion? It's a growth related movement. While in the case of touch me not plant, it was not a growth related movement. So going back to our touch me not plant, what we find is that there is a site where the touch is there, the stimulus is there, and there is a site where there is response. Are these two sites same? They are not. So when the stimulus is there or is picked up at one point, how does it reach the point of response? That is what we are going to now study and understand. Transmission of stimulus is there in animals also, but it is through nervous system. Now plants don't have nervous system, they don't have muscular system. So how is this impulse transmitted? It is through electrical stimulus. And just like muscle cells, the cells of the plants change their shape. How do they change their shape? Due to the movement of water, which means when water flows into a cell, it swells. When it moves out of the cell, then it shrinks. Something like, say, like this. Now it is this movement of the water into the cell and out of the cell which will also cause a response, and that is what happens in a touch me not plant. If you see a leaf of touch me not plant, at the base you will find a swollen portion. This is called pulvinus. When we touch a plant, touch me not plant, then water flows out of the pulvinus cells and the cells shrink. So the leaves fold, and actually those small leaves are the leaflets, because it's a compound leaf, and the entire leaf droops. This is how the movement takes place. But in the case of seeds, when we will study, we will find the movement is different. It is directional. Now, the directional movements are called the tropic movements. Like in case of the movement of, say, a sunflower or movement of a seed. How are these two movements different? Immediately what will come to your mind is that the movement of the touch me not plant is very quick. It happens instantly. But the movement of seeds is slower. Secondly, the movement in the case of sunflower or any other movement in a plant due to sunlight or gravity of the earth, they are slower. So, basically keep in mind these two differences. You can have a table and in that table you can keep these 2 points. The movements which are non-directional, as in case of touch me not plant, they are called nastic movements, and the other ones are called tropical movements. Nastic are non-directional. What does that mean? They are neither towards the stimulus nor away from the stimulus. The direction has no role in it to play, while tropical movements are directional. Then these movements are quick, while these movements are slow. Now, in the case of tropical movements, the stimuli can be many, like it can be light when it is called phototropic movements. Photo means light. Then gravity, and it will be called geotropic. Geo means earth. Then touch, thigmotropic. Then heat, which will be thermotropic. And the movement which is caused by the chemicals is called chemotropic. If you remember that during fertilization in flowers, the pollen grains produce a pollen tube. Now, that growth of the pollen tube or the movement caused by the growth is due to chemicals produced by the ovary. So, that is an example of chemotropism. Stem is positively phototropic. Now, what does that mean? It means it grows towards the light, positive phototropic. While root, does it grow towards light? No, it grows away from light. So, it is negative phototropism. But in the case of geotropism, that is response to gravity, it is reverse. Stem is negative geo, while root is positive geotropic. The pollen grains show chemotropism, and the tendrils of a pea plant, they show thigmotropism. Now, this can be easily explained with the help of a simple experiment. It is a very simple experiment. You can take a conical flask, pour water in it, put a plant. Now, this plant can be placed in a box which is open from one side. Now keep this box towards a windowsill from where sun is coming or sunlight can come. After 2-3 days, what will you find? That there is a change. Now let's see what is the change. Can you make out the change? See, where is stem growing? Towards sun. And the roots, they are moving away. So through this experiment, we can easily see how stem is positively phototropic while root is negatively geotropic. This is an experiment to show phototropism. Now in the case of pea plant, the movement is of different kind. In the pea plant, you know, pea plant, it is a weak plant. It cannot stand on its own. Then how does it stand erect? It takes the help of a sport. And it has thread-like, coily, wiry structures called tendrils. These tendrils are actually leaves. So they have been modified into tendrils, right? Now these tendrils, they seem to be moving. They also move around the sport. How does that happen? The moment a tendril comes in contact with a sport, the part which is touching the sport starts growing rapidly, while the part which is away from the sport, which has not got the stimulus of touch, that grows slowly. As a result, the tendril bends and moves around the sport, and it looks as if it's moving. So now you understand how this growth related movement is in the case of tendrils. The main thing to remember is the part that is in contact with sport will grow more rapidly as compared to the part which is not touching the sport, and this differential growth triggers movement. How interesting. See, a plant can pick up the information about the sport and take help. And what do we human beings do? Don't we do similar things? When we know this is the place from where we can get help, we take it. Right? So after this, we come to another aspect, a very, very beautiful aspect of plants. Now this electrical impulse is there, but then it's not steady, it's not consistent. Why not? Because electrical impulse, when it reaches a cell, then it brings about certain changes. And by the time the resetting takes place, some time lapses before another impulse can be transmitted. So it is not a continuous process. Another point is that this kind of impulse may not reach every cell. That is what happens in the case of animals also. The electrical impulse or the nerve impulse may not reach every cell, but here we need it to reach every cell. So what is the alternative? Now imagine if there was a chemical which is in a liquid form or sometimes maybe gaseous form. Liquids, you know, can diffuse very easily all around. So that's the solution. When a liquid diffuses into all cells, the cells are able to pick up the information. How do they do it? They do it with the help of molecules on the surface. Now what are these substances which are in the liquid form that diffuse? They are the plant hormones. Now, there is a hormone, the most common hormone, it is called auxin. It induces growth. The shoot tip and the root tip has auxin. You know, if we cut the tip, the growth stops. Why? Because there is no auxin. In fact, there is an experiment that if you cut a tip, the growth stops. But if you have kept the tip on an agar-agar block and then you replace this agar-agar block on the stem, it starts growing again. Why? Because from the tip, auxin came into the agar-agar block. So, what is the conclusion? It is the auxins which trigger growth in plants, the vertical growth. That is not all. Then there is another hormone which was first of all discovered in a fungus called Gibberella. This fungus really triggers growth in crops. And from this then the scientists found out that there is a chemical substance, a hormone, gibberellin, which also induces growth. Now, when you are learning the spellings of gibberellin, do not forget this E. Generally, students make this mistake. They will write gibber and lin, but it is gibberellin. There is one more E. This also induces positive growth. And the third one is cytokinins. You have rightly guessed, cyto word refers to cytoplasm and kinins division. So, when the cell is dividing, it is not only the nucleus which divides, it is also the cytoplasm that divides, and cytokinins triggers cell division. Where does cell division take place? Obviously, the parts which are showing rapid growth, like seeds, fruits. So, these three hormones, they induce growth. Now, you want light, you put on the switch and there is light due to electric current. But what will happen if you are continuously putting it in on situation? Of course, there will be light, but there will be too much of consumption. Maybe it is not even needed, maybe it is disastrous. Same is the situation here. We do not want only growth. The processes are such that sometimes the growth has to be stopped also, inhibited also, and that function is done by the fourth type of hormone, which is called abscisic acid. Abscisic acid retards growth. So, it is needed for things like leaf fall. You know, in many plants, especially the deciduous plants, leaves fall. For that, abscisic acid is required. There is another hormone called ethylene, which is in gaseous form, and that also inhibits or retards growth. So, in addition to the electrical impulse, another way of controlling and coordinating various processes in plants is the plant hormones. Now, just imagine you are walking in grass and suddenly what you see? A snake. Now, what happens? You freeze due to fear. Your heart starts beating fast, breathing rate increases, face turns red and there are goose pimples. That is your first response. And then probably next you want to run away. Maybe you are not able to, you pick up a stone or maybe a stick to fight the snake. Now this fight flight response is very complex, and not only we do it, even the animals. Have you watched a squirrel? The moment she senses a danger or an emergency, again the responses are fight and flight. Now how are these responses constructed? What triggers these responses? Certainly nerves cannot. Like I explained to you, nerve impulse cannot be consistent. Now there is a chemical substance called hormone, and the name is adrenaline. The adrenaline prepares us for these complex responses to emergency, like a snake, or maybe getting bad marks when ma'am is distributing papers, or something else. Now the adrenaline is produced by adrenal gland. What is renal? Renal means kidney. Now from where is this kidney coming? Because this gland is above kidney and it produces adrenaline. The adrenaline also raises the sugar level in blood, and that is how it prepares us for the emergency. The diaphragm moves down, the rib cage moves up. That was the cause of breathing, so the breathing rate increases. Blood is rushed to heart so that more oxygen can be pumped. That was inhaled by increased breathing rate. Why so? So that more energy can be released. On the other hand, the blood supply to the digestive system and to the skin gets reduced. Why? Because the arteries and the muscles, they get constricted and the blood is diverted to the skeletal muscles. So many things are happening just so that we are prepared for the emergency. You must have also observed some people seem to be a little more sensitive. Somebody says a thing, the tears start rolling down. Not their fault. It's a case of more active adrenal glands. So that's the role of adrenal gland and the adrenaline. Another important thing, there is so much of ads also on it. Whenever anybody talks of salt, they don't talk just salt. They talk iodized salt. Why so? Why iodine is so important? Have you ever observed some people develop a swelling on the neck region? What is that disease? That disease is goiter. It's an endemic disease. That means it is restricted to a particular area, like say Garhwal. Why? Because water there is deficient in iodine. Children often develop goiter, and the result, retarded mental and physical growth. So what is in iodine which is connected with growth? Actually, iodine is a very important part of a hormone called thyroxine. Thyroxine is produced by the thyroid gland, which is present in the neck region. This thyroxine has iodine, and thyroxine is responsible for coordinating carbohydrate, fat and protein metabolism. So it is very important. If thyroxine is produced in less amount, then this rate of metabolism becomes very slow. And what is the result? Obesity. And this situation is called hypothyroidism. Hypo means less and hyper more. So, if there will be more thyroxine, then it will be called hyperthyroidism. So, the rate of metabolism is dependent upon thyroxine. Now, I have given you two examples, but who stimulates these organs or these glands, like say thyroid, and another one we studied, adrenal? There has to be something else which triggers them to work. They of course trigger in turn some other aspects, but who triggers them? There is a master gland, and that is the pituitary gland. Why is it called the master gland? Because it produces hormones that stimulate other endocrine glands like TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, ASH, adrenal stimulating hormone. The pituitary gland is found at the base of the brain. Not only this, pituitary gland also produces growth hormones.